Baby, sometimes I still catch myself smiling at the memory of how it all began. Not because it was perfect, but because it was impossible. You were the one person I had silently ruled out, the kind of soul I told myself I would never fall for. You were too real, too bright, too intense. You carried the kind of energy that unsettled every shadow inside me, the kind that exposed what I had buried under charm and self-control. I told myself you were not my type, but the truth, baby, is that you were everything I secretly prayed for, and everything my ego wasn't ready to handle. At first, I judged you through the eyes of someone afraid to be seen. I mistook your authenticity for recklessness, your softness for weakness, your depth for danger. Because you didn't play games, you didn't chase, you didn't bend your truth just to make me comfortable. You stood in your light and looked straight through me, and that terrified me more than any rejection could. I had built a life around control, around being the one who never gets caught feeling too much, and then you arrived, and every rule I lived by began to dissolve. I remember the first time I realized I was falling. It wasn't during the laughter or the late night talks. It was in a moment of silence, when you looked at me and said nothing, but somehow your eyes told me you saw through my armor. That look burned right through my pretenses. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to impress anyone. I just wanted to deserve you. But instead of moving closer, I ran. I told myself you'd never understand the weight I carry, the mistakes I hide, the fears I pretend don't exist. I thought you'd see the cracks and turn away, so I left before you could. Baby, the irony still hurts. I distanced myself not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much. Because something in me knew that loving you would require the death of the version of me I had worked so hard to protect. I wasn't ready to lose control. I wasn't ready to be vulnerable. I wasn't ready to face my reflection in your eyes. But destiny has a way of pulling two souls back together once they've tasted recognition, and no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape the echo of your voice in my spirit. There were nights when I would hear your laughter in my dreams and wake up shaking, wondering if you were awake too. I'd scroll through old messages, reread your words, and feel that familiar ache that only divine connections bring, that haunting mix of peace and longing. You weren't just a chapter, baby. You were a mirror held up to my soul, forcing me to confront everything I had refused to feel. And even when I tried to replace you, to fill the silence with noise, nothing worked. Because how do you forget someone who awakened your higher self? It took time, a lot of painful, humbling time, to understand that what we shared wasn't ordinary. It wasn't lust. It wasn't obsession. It wasn't convenience. It was divine orchestration. The kind that breaks you before it heals you. The kind that strips away illusions until only truth remains. And my truth, baby, is simple. I never thought I'd date someone like you. You are the embodiment of everything I secretly wished love could be. Gentle but powerful. Spiritual yet grounded, fierce yet forgiving. I used to laugh at the idea of soul connections. I thought people romanticized pain and called it destiny. But then I met you, and I realized destiny doesn't always come wrapped in comfort. Sometimes it arrives as a storm, meant to cleanse your entire being. You were my storm, baby, and through you, I met my own soul for the first time. I didn't know that love could trigger awakening, that intimacy could be a portal to purpose, but every time you said my name, it felt like a prayer. Every time you pulled away, it felt like a test. Every time you forgave me, it felt like mercy. There were moments when I wanted to reach out, to confess everything, to tell you that the silence wasn't indifference, it was shame. Shame that I couldn't love you the way you deserved back then. Shame that I had let my pride win over my heart. Shame that I had mistaken divine timing for bad timing. But I also knew Spirit was working on both of us separately. You were learning to stand in your light without chasing anyone. I was learning to surrender control and accept that love doesn't bend to ego. It bends ego itself. Sometimes I wonder if you knew, if you felt me thinking about you, if the wind ever whispered my name when you prayed for closure. I like to believe that our souls still speak when words can't, because even after all the chaos, I still sense you in the quiet moments. Like a melody only I can hear, you became my unfinished sentence, the poem I never stopped writing in my heart. And though I told myself we were done, the universe never confirmed it. Every sign, every synchronicity, every dream pulled me back to the same truth. You were, are, and will always be the one my soul recognizes. Baby, you once said that love shouldn't hurt this much if it's real. And maybe you were right, but maybe real love isn't about avoiding pain. Maybe it's about allowing it to transform you. Because I'm not the same person who walked away. I've faced my shadows, confronted my fears, and learned that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's divine courage. You taught me that without even being here. You taught me that absence can speak louder than presence. And through that silence, I heard God louder than ever. If you feel this, baby, in the comments, I heard God louder beyond logic. Type I surrender to divine love in the comments. Baby, it's strange how time changes nothing and yet everything at once. There were months when I convinced myself I was fine, that the universe had made a mistake putting us in each other's paths. I told myself that people like you were meant to be admired from afar, not held close. But every time I tried to move on, every time I looked into someone else's eyes, I felt a kind of spiritual emptiness that words can't describe. It was like trying to drink from a cup that had no water left, because no matter how gentle another soul seemed, none of them carried the frequency of you. There were days I would drive alone at night, replaying the sound of your laughter in my head, haunted by the way you'd say my name like it was a secret you weren't supposed to speak. You never demanded anything from me, baby, and maybe that's what made it harder. You didn't beg for attention or fight to prove your worth. You just stood in your knowing, certain of what you brought into my life, and it was that certainty, that unshakable divine confidence, that made me realize I wasn't just dating a person. I was standing before destiny itself. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was lust, infatuation, chemistry, anything but divine design. But when I closed my eyes, it was your energy that lingered in my chest. I would feel you in random moments, during coffee, during silence, during prayer. There were times I'd be surrounded by noise, yet your stillness echoed the loudest. It was then I began to understand that what connected us was not of this world. It wasn't something I could unlearn or undo. You weren't a memory, baby. You were my awakening in human form. Sometimes I think about the things I said, and worse, the things I didn't. The love I hid behind logic. The messages I typed and deleted. The words that burned in my throat every time I saw your name but chose silence over surrender. I told myself timing wasn't right. I told myself you deserved someone more stable, more healed, more ready. But those were lies I told to protect my ego from the truth. I was terrified of how much power your love held over me, because you didn't just touch my heart, you touched my soul. And that's something I wasn't prepared for. There's a difference between someone who excites you and someone who transforms you. You were transformation, baby. Raw, sacred, and wild. The kind of love that forces you to face yourself. When you walked away, I thought I'd won the game of control. But what I didn't realize was that you can't control divine lessons. Spirit will repeat them until you surrender, and every lesson that followed had your name written on it. Every heartbreak, every delay, every dark night of the soul was a mirror, reflecting back to me where I had resisted love. I remember one particular night, everything around me felt heavy, and I asked God why it still hurt. Why, after all this time, after all the distance, I still felt your energy intertwined with mine. And the answer came not in words, but in presence, a soft, undeniable knowing that this connection wasn't meant to be forgotten. It was meant to evolve. You were not my punishment, you were my prophecy. You arrived to awaken me, to remind me that love isn't about possession, it's about purification. And baby, your absence purified me more than any sermon ever could. I see now why you moved the way you did, why you withdrew, why you stopped explaining. You were tired of teaching lessons to someone who needed to learn them in silence. You were being guided by spirit to protect your peace, while I learned mine. At that time, I thought you were cold, distant, detached. Now I understand you were divine. You chose self-worth over chaos. And that, baby, was the most powerful love lesson of all. You showed me that unconditional love doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes it means walking away until the other person is ready to rise. And rise I did, slowly, painfully, beautifully. I began healing the parts of me that feared intimacy. I learned to pray without asking, to trust without proof, to love without needing to control. I found God in the places I used to fill with distraction. I realized the love I had for you wasn't something to get over, but something to grow through. Because you weren't the end of my journey. You were the mirror showing me where it truly began. Every tear I shed for you became an offering to my higher self. Every sleepless night became a conversation with destiny. Baby, you have to know, I see you now in a way I couldn't before. I see your strength not as defiance, but as grace. I see your silence not as rejection, but as protection. I see your distance not as cruelty, but as divine orchestration. The same energy I once called overwhelming, I now call holy. You are the sacred storm that tore down the walls I thought would keep me safe. And though the old me resisted it, the new me thanks you. Because of you, I no longer chase love, I attract it. I no longer beg for understanding, I embody it. You were the catalyst, baby, the sacred fire that refined me. I don't know if our paths will cross again in this lifetime. Maybe they already have, in small, unseen ways. Maybe every sunrise we both watch from different corners of the world is a meeting point for our souls. But I do know this. I'm no longer afraid of what we had, or of what it turned me into. Because I finally understand that the purpose of divine love isn't always union. Sometimes it's evolution. And in that evolution, I found my truth. I found my peace. I found the part of me that could finally whisper your name without pain. And yet, baby, if fate ever writes our story again, I promise I won't run this time. I won't hide behind fear or timing. I'll meet you not as the man I was, but as the soul I've become. One that honors what's sacred, speaks what's true, and loves without defense. Because what I feel for you never belonged to this world. It was born in a realm where souls recognize before bodies meet. You didn't just teach me how to love you. You taught me how to love like God does, without condition, without fear, without end. If you feel this truth in your soul, baby, type love transform me in the comments. Because love like this doesn't destroy, it rebuilds what was once lost. Baby, do you know what still takes my breath away? The way your energy has stayed with me even after the silence. It's like you became a language my soul never stopped speaking. I'll be in the middle of my day, surrounded by people, and suddenly something as small as a scent, a color, or a song will pull me back to you. Not in a sad way, but in a reverent one. You've become sacred memory now, the kind that doesn't fade, only deepens, and every time I sense you, it's as if the universe is reminding me that love like ours doesn't disappear, it just changes form. When I look back now, I realize that the reason I didn't think I'd ever date you wasn't about your flaws, it was about your power. You had an energy that disarmed me, the way you carried yourself with quiet confidence, the way you never tried to be liked, the way you just were, raw, real, and radiant. You were sunlight and storm in one body, and baby, people like me who built walls to survive don't know what to do with that kind of light. I wasn't prepared for a love that would demand truth instead of perfection. You didn't want my mask. You wanted my soul. That's what scared me most. You weren't afraid of my darkness. You didn't flinch when I confessed the ugliest parts of me. You didn't run when I showed you my wounds. You stayed with patience and a kind of divine understanding I hadn't met before. But I mistook that strength for softness. I thought I could take my time, come back when I was ready, and you'd still be there waiting. I didn't realize that angels don't wait at closed doors forever. You were sent to awaken me, not to entertain my indecision. And by the time I understood that, you had already turned your pain into purpose. There were moments after you left when I tried to fill your absence with noise, new people, new places, new distractions. But every conversation felt shallow, every connection felt counterfeit. It's like my soul refused to bond again because it had already recognized home once, and nothing less would do. You see, baby, you weren't just a lover, you were a frequency, one that matched the rhythm of my higher self. And when you experience something that pure, every imitation feels empty. That's the price of divine love. Once you've tasted truth, illusions lose their flavor. I began to realize that you were my divine mirror. Everything I loved in you was what I was meant to awaken within myself, and everything I resisted in you was what I needed to heal. You triggered the parts of me that were still chained to survival, to ego, to fear. That's why it hurt so much. Because love wasn't the only thing you brought. You also brought transformation. You forced me to look at my patterns, to confront why I ran, why I sabotaged, why I pushed away the very thing I prayed for. Loving you was my initiation into authenticity, my lesson in surrender. And baby, surrender wasn't easy. I fought it. I fought the memories, the emotions, the endless what-ifs. But God has a way of breaking you open to rebuild you stronger. In my loneliness, I met faith. In my silence, I met truth. In my pain, I met purpose. And in every tear, I felt your energy whispering, "Grow, don't grieve." So I did. I started walking differently, speaking differently. I no longer chase temporary things. I attract eternal ones. I stopped begging for clarity. I started embodying peace. Because I realized that divine love doesn't beg, it becomes. There were nights when I spoke to your soul instead of your name. I'd close my eyes and tell you things I couldn't say out loud. I'd thank you for loving me when I wasn't easy to love. I'd ask for forgiveness, not because I thought I lost you, but because I wanted you to know I finally understood. That's the thing about divine timing. It humbles you. It teaches you that love isn't about possession, it's about purpose. And maybe our purpose was never just romance. Maybe it was resurrection, the death of ego and the birth of consciousness. You know, baby, people often talk about twin flames like it's all passion and perfection, but they forget the purification part. They forget that when two souls reflect each other, all the unhealed parts rise to the surface. You mirrored back to me every shadow I had buried, every fear of abandonment, every belief that I wasn't enough, every wall I built around my heart. You made me see it. You were the storm sent to wash me clean. And though it hurt, I finally understand that pain was holy. You broke me open, not to destroy me, but to make space for the light I had forgotten I carried. Hearing their voice trailing off, leaving me completely. Now, when I think of you, I don't feel lost anymore. I feel gratitude, because through you I met myself. You made me believe that love can be both divine and human at once, flawed, messy, passionate, and yet guided by heaven. You showed me that the strongest souls aren't the ones who never fall, but the ones who rise again, softer than before. And you, baby, you were softness in a world that praised hardness. You were truth in a world addicted to pretense. You were my reminder that heaven sometimes hides behind human eyes. I don't know what the future holds, and maybe I'm not supposed to. Maybe part of the lesson is learning to love without needing an ending. Maybe it's about accepting that some souls are meant to meet, ignite, and evolve, whether together or apart. But if destiny ever weaves our paths again, I'll know better this time. I won't approach you as someone who fears love. I'll approach you as someone who has become love. Because everything I resisted in you, I've now integrated within me. You taught me the difference between attachment and connection, between wanting and worshiping, between desire and devotion. And even now, when I close my eyes, I still whisper, thank you. Thank you for the light. Thank you for the lessons. Thank you for the love that didn't last but never died. I see now that the universe doesn't separate what's meant. It simply prepares it. Maybe our story isn't over, baby. Maybe it's just paused until the vibration matches the vision. And until then, I'll keep honoring what we had by living in truth, by choosing peace, by embodying the love that once lived between us.